double Mac, anchor. The only way the oppressor can maintain his position is by fostering, nurturing, building contempt for the oppressed. It can end in only one way. The excesses lead to resistance lead to brutality. The brutality leads to more resistance, and finally, the whole question will be resolved with either the uneconomic destruction of the oppressed, or the end of oppression, the end of economic need. And that's what we're working for, revolution. The prison movement in general, the movement to prove to the establishment that the concentration camp technique won't work on the function of the prison as an institution within the totalitarian state. We have to destroy that function. That function can no longer be viable. It's one of the strongest institutions that supports the totalitarian state. We have to destroy it. We have to destroy its effectiveness. And that's what the prison movement is all about. There'll be no peace in a concentration camp. None whatsoever. I'm saying that it's impossible the concentration camp for resistors. I'm saying that it's impossible the concentration camp for resistors. All the various means of concentrating population to better control or to eliminate, liquidate, isolate the dynamic sections of the movement, the protagonists in the movement. We have to prove that thing won't work here. The only way to prove it is resistance once inside. And then that resistance has to be supported, of course, from the street. As we understood that what the function of prison, within the prison state, within the police state, has to be explained, has to be elucidated, has to be, you got keep it on the street, because you can't fight it alone. You can fight, but the results are usually not, they're not conducive to proving a point, that this thing won't work on us. From inside we fight and we die, but that's not the point. The point is in the new phase of war is to fight and win. The guerrilla, the new type of warrior that's developed out of the conflicts of the third world countries doesn't fight to necessarily not show battle. He fights to win. And he's fighting what we call the poor man's war. It's not a simple question of hit and run or of terrorism, or let me say counter-terrorism. It's an overall question of proving to the establishment that there's no possible way for them to win with their technique. We have proved to them that wars are fought and won by men and not by mechanical devices. I'm convinced that in the black colony, I think the black colony is the most revolutionary stratum of the lower class. I think they're ready for revolution right now. We just need some people in the front. Get in front of them and pull. People like John. I think they're ready for revolution right now. We just need some people in the front. As they left the building, the pigs fired. Johnson fired back, and then they retreated. They were just testing them, see if they were willing to, really willing to engage in killing and dying. And when they were convinced that they were, then they retreated. I think both sides fired into the air. But it was a standoff. All the way they got trapped in the truck and until they, confronted the prison pigs. The most vicious pigs on earth, the prison pigs. No regard whatsoever to anyone, like none. The state needs goons, and the guys that fall in there need jobs. That's the whole situation. Anyone can fall in there. Cat could fall in there. Drunk to them, kill me, shoot him, shoot hard, if I let it.
Good evening and welcome to Freedom is a Constant Struggle with your host, Keith Wattley. And we had a little bit of a rough start. Everything that could go wrong today did. But I'm happy to report that I am going to have a guest later on. Keith Wattley of Uncommon Law is going to join us in about a half hour. And I want to, this is a Black August special, as you can already tell. And we're going to go, I'm going to tell you the story now, and we're going to put some pictures up of George Jackson, and while I tell the story of George. One cannot tell the story of Black August without first providing the reader with a brief glimpse of the black movement behind California prison walls in the 60s, led by George Jackson, with W.L. Nolan, Hugo Pinell, Howard Toll, and others. As Jackson wrote, when I was accused of robbing a gas station of $70, I accepted, that's the August 7th photos, but we'll get some George Jackson photos up in a minute. But as Jackson wrote, when I was accused of robbing a gas station at $70, I accepted the deal, but when time came for sentencing, they tossed me into the penitentiary with 1 to life. It was 1960. I was 18 years old. I met Marx, Lenin, Trotsky, Engels, and Mao when I entered prison, and they redeemed me. For the first 4 years, I studied nothing but economics and military ideas. I met black guerrillas George Big Jake Lewis and James Carr, W.L. Nolan, Bill Christmas, Tony Gibson, and many, many others. We attempted to transform the black criminal mentality into a black revolutionary mentality. As a result, each of us has been subjected to most years of the most vicious reactionary violence by the state. Our mortality rate is almost what you would expect to find in the history of Dachau. 3 of us, Nolan, Sweet Jugs Miller, and Cleve Edwards, were murdered several months ago, meaning January 13th, 1969, by a pig shooting from 30 feet above their heads with a military rifle. When the brothers first demanded the killer guard be tried for murder, they were rebuffed. Upon their insistence, the administration held a kangaroo court and 3 days later returned a verdict of justifiable homicide. Shortly afterward, a white guard was found beaten to death and thrown from a tier. 6 days later, 3 prisoners were accused of murder and became known as the Soledad brothers. I'm being tried in court right now with two other brothers, John Clouchet and Fleta Drumgo, for the alleged slaying of a prison guard. This charge carries an automatic death penalty for me. I can't get life. I already have it. You can switch it to me occasionally. No. On August 21st, 1971, after numerous failed attempts on his life, the state finally succeeded in assassinating George Jackson, by then Field Marshal of the Black Panther Party, in what was described by prison officials as an escape attempt in which Jackson allegedly smuggled a gun into San Quentin in a wig. That feat was proven impossible, and evidence subsequently suggested a setup designed by prison officials to eliminate Jackson once and for all. However, they didn't count on losing any of their own in the process. On that fateful day, 3 notoriously racist prison guards and 2 inmate turnkeys were also killed. Jackson was shot and killed by guards as he drew fire away from the other prisoners in the Adjustment Center lockup of San Quentin. In his first bestseller, Soledad Brother, George wrote, "The blanket indictment of the white so-called race has done nothing but perplex us, inhibit us. The theory that all whites are the immediate enemy and all blacks are brothers, making them loyal, is silly and indicative of a lazy mind, to be generous, since it could be a fascist plot. It doesn't explain the black pig. There were 6 on the Hampton Clark kill. It doesn't explain the black paratroopers, just more pigs who put down the Great Detroit riot. And it doesn't explain the pseudo-bourgeois who can be found almost everywhere in the halls of government working for white supremacy, fascism, and capitalism." Quote, "Black capitalism," and that's unquote from Soledad Brother, and black capitalism, black against itself, the silliest contradiction in a long train of spineless, mindless contradictions. Another painless ultimate remedy. Be a better fascist than the fascist. In his second book, published posthumously, George wrote, "Freedom means warmth and protection against harsh exposure to the elements. It means food, not garbage. It means truth, harmony, and the social relations that spring from these. It means the best medical attention whenever it's needed. It means employment that is reasonable, that coincides with the individual necessities and feelings. We will have this freedom, even at the cost of total war." So then now I'm going to go to talk about Black August in general. Black August is a month of great significance for Africans throughout the diaspora, but particularly here in the U.S. where it originated. August, as Mumia Abu-Jamal noted, is a month of meaning, of repression and radical resistance, of injustice and divine justice, of repression and righteous rebellion, of individual and collective efforts to free the slaves and break the chains that bind us, unquote. On this 38th anniversary of Black August, first organized to honor our fallen freedom fighters, Jonathan and George Jackson, Katari Golden, James McLean, William Christmas, and the sole survivor of the courthouse slave rebellion, Ruchell Sinkhu McGee. We can put some photos up of Ruchell now. On August 7th, 1970, just a few days after George Jackson was transferred to San Quentin, his younger brother Jonathan Jackson, 17, invaded Marin County Courthouse with a satchel full of handguns, an assault rifle, and a shotgun hidden under his raincoat. "Freeze," he commanded as he tossed guns to William Christmas, James McLean, and Ruchell McGee. McGee was on the witness stand testifying for McLean on trial for assaulting a guard in the wake of a guard's murder of another black prisoner, Fred Billingsley, beaten and tear gassed to death in his cell. A jailhouse lawyer, McGee had deluged the courts with petitions for 7 years contesting his illegal conviction in 1963. The courts had refused to listen, so McGee seized the hour and joined the guerrillas as they took the judge, prosecutor, and 3 jurors hostage to a waiting van. They were planning to get to a radio station to demand the release of the Soledad brothers and to let everyone know what was going on behind those walls, that brothers were being murdered for just being black. To report his gathering quickly outside the courthouse, Jonathan shouted, You can take our pictures. We are the revolutionaries. Operating with courage and calm, even their enemies had to respect. The 4 black freedom fighters commandeered their hostages out of the courthouse without a hitch. You have the courthouse scene? The plan was to use the hostages to take over. No, that's Move. There it is. That's William Christmas right there. That's the judge. That's Rochelle McGee on the right, and the several jurors. The plan that was to use the hostages to take over a radio station and broadcast the racist, murderous prison conditions and demand the immediate release of the Soledad brothers. But before Jonathan could drive the van out of the parking lot, the San Quentin guards arrived and opened fire. When the shooting stopped, Jonathan, Christmas, McLean, and the judge lay dead. McGee and the prosecutor were critically wounded, and 1 juror suffered a minor arm wound. McGee survived his wounds and was tried originally with co-defendant Angela Davis. Their trials were later severed, and Davis was eventually acquitted of all charges. McGee was convicted of simple kidnapping and remains in prison to date. 54 years with no physical assaults on his record. An incredible jailhouse lawyer, McGee has been responsible for countless prisoners being released. He remains strong and is still fighting for his freedom and ours. Okay, so the next thing we have, we're going to talk about, let's play that film clip of Yogi. Yeah, we're going to talk about Hugo Yogi Bear Pinel, who was killed by, we believe, in a setup by the prison administration. We can't take that. On August 12th, 2015, I can't believe it's already 2 years since he's gone. But this interview was done in 1983 when he was at Folsom State Prison.
Hugo Pinel is considered the most dangerous prisoner in California. He's kept alive by total isolation from the rest of the inmates at Folsom Prison. That label, he says, may eventually lead to his death in prison.
I just started my 20th year in prison, and my 15th year in isolation straight, and my 14th year without having a contact visit with my family or any loved ones, you see. So, and, you know, like I've been made to be in the eyes of the public by the department to be the most dangerous prisoner in the state of California, you see. But now I find myself being the most endangered prisoner because of the circumstances that have been built around me by the administration.
At the San Quentin 6 trial, Pinel insisted he represent himself. As a social revolutionary, he says he didn't trust lawyers. Now that Spain will be retried, Pinel has also started the legal proceedings for a new trial. The Spain conviction was overturned after a secret meeting between the judge and a juror was discovered. For now, Pinel says he is trying to stay alive and trying to live down his notorious reputation.
I want to believe that if I ever come out of prison, that I can be a constructive element to my community, you see. But if I react at any particular time, I feel that they will have won the game that they want to play, because either way, I'm doomed, you see. If they kill me, they succeeded. If I react, they succeeded in trying to prove to the public that I am, you know, what they say that I am supposed to be.
The name of Hugo Pinel is one that used to be in the headlines but hasn't been heard from much in years. A radical prison inmate, a man considered extremely dangerous by prison officials. Pinel took part almost 13 years ago in one of the most violent episodes in California prison history. That was a case of the San Quentin 6. But now, after spending more than half his life behind bars, Pinel claims he is more victim than criminal. And to get that view across, he's agreed to only his second interview ever, and the first by any Bay Area news organization. Art Cribbs has that report.
It's a long ways from Nicaragua to Folsom, a long time from a wild kid of 19 to a mature prison veteran of 39. Such is the case of Hugo Pinel. Hugo Pinel is what is traditionally called institutionalized. He's been in state penitentiaries for almost 20 years. 14 of those years he's been in the SHU. That's the Security Housing Unit. We call it the Hole.
They brought me to Folsom in 1976. They took all the chains. They told me, you never be chained here, you never be handcuffed, and as long as you behave, then we're going to give you contact visits and treat you like everybody else. That has not been the case. I've been without chains, I've been without cuffs, I've been able to move around the guards, around the staff here, and there's no threat on my part, there's no danger on my part, you see.
A lot has happened to Hugo Pinnell. In 1971, Hugo's close friend and political ally, George Jackson, was killed in what prison officials said was an escape attempt led by Jackson. Hugo Pinnell insists Jackson was set up and murdered. Pinnell was later convicted with the so-called San Quentin Six for that incident on August 21st, 1971. Today, Pinnell is placed in a 138-cell unit. He's allowed outside a minimum of 10 hours a week. Outside means in the exercise yard within the state's maximum area. He says he remains here because he's a political prisoner.
I'm a political prisoner because I became aware. I became politically involved with the conditions in prison. I became historically aware of what was going on with black people and what was going on, and throughout the world politically. So I think that I am because of the way that I've been persecuted. And all I can say is that it has been because of my political beliefs.
Pinnell calls himself a revolutionary, but says he's not a danger to society, that he's the one in danger. He was first isolated from other inmates at Soledad. It was there he was also isolated from his family and the world.
I was in the hole in Owen in Soledad in 1970, and as a result of representing the strike, I was chosen the representative of the strike, and that was about the longest strike we ever had in Soledad, especially in Owen. And as a result of that, the officers began kind of hostile towards me. They wanted to isolate me. They wanted to do certain things. So one day they charged me with the assault on a guard, you see, and they took me from that section to a strip cell and kept me there for a while until they moved me to a special cell across the wing, you see. And after that, ever since then, like, they took my contact visits from my family, from my loved ones, and I haven't even had a contact visit since then.
On January 28th, Pinnell was stabbed. It was the 6th time he had been attacked in 7 years. Prison officials believe he's made enemies here because of his political beliefs.
Right.
He says prison authorities want him dead.
I feel that everything that has happened to me with regards to attacks, that leads to the administration taking part in this.
Although California law requires an annual review of inmates who are in the hole, Pinnell has been here more than half of his 20-year prison career. Warden Joseph Campoy would not talk to us about Pinnell, but a prison official in Sacramento did say Hugo Pinnell will be an old man before he gets out, if he is ever released. Hugo Pinnell is a man buried alive, but who has a family who refuses to let him be forgotten. At Folsom State Prison, I'm Art Cribbs, KTVU, Channel.
And of course, they finally did succeed in killing Yogi when they allowed him on the yard of Folsom Prison after his being in solitary confinement nearly 46 years, and only days afterwards. But anyway, shortly after August 21st, 6 AC prisoners, that AC is the Adjustment Center, a euphemism for lockup, were singled out and put on trial for various charges of murder and assault, wearing 30 pounds of change in the Marin courtroom. Fleta Drumgo, David Johnson, Hugo L.A. Pinnell, Yogi Bear, Luis Talamantes, Willie Sundiata Tate, and Johnny Spain, the only one convicted of murder. The other were all put on trial. The others were either acquitted or convicted of assault. Pinnell was the only one kept in lockups for nearly 46 years, 24 years in Pelican Bay's SHU, a torture chamber if there ever was one. A true warrior, Pinnell would put his life on the line to defend his fellow captives. In the words of Rashid Johnson, quote, "Enough has been reported about circumstances surrounding Comrade Hugo's death for us to conclude that he was set up by California prison officials and assassinated by their inmate lackeys. But by murdering him, the pigs have given our struggle yet another martyr and hero whose memory and example will inspire us today and for generations to come, just as his own comrade and mentor, George Lester Jackson's has. In death as in life, Hugo stands out as a shining example of one transformed by a love and dedication to the cause of the oppressed and to serve the people that only a conscious revolutionary awakening and practice can bring. He was confined in California's inhumane solitary confinement for over 43 years, places whose primary purpose was to break the will and sanity of those who dared to oppose the oppressive order and divisive prison culture created and cultivated by our captors, but Hugo was never broken, unquote. And I'm going to stop there and welcome to the studio Keith Wattley of Uncommon Law. Thank you so much for joining us on short notice.
Hello.
It's such a pleasure to see you again.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm
Yes.
happy to be here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so we've kind of muddled through the first part of the Black August.
Okay.
Everything went wrong for my getting here, and I just made it minutes past 5. So
Oh, I see. Okay.
we got off to a little bit of a rough start.
It all works out.
Yeah, it's all worked out, thank
Yeah.
goodness. So it's good to see you.
It's
And
good to be here.
so you were Hugo Pinell's lawyer.
Yes, I was. I got to know him very well. Got to spend a lot of really meaningful time with him. Learned a lot about, obviously, his experience. Learned a lot about the prison system. But more importantly, I learned a lot about people.
Right.
And their ability to overcome just really unspeakable conditions,
I know.
and the power of the human mind and spirit as exemplified by Hugo, and all that he did and all he was.
Right. I remember the last time we talked, you mentioned what his response was when you went to the first hearing, and he had, for the first time, you reached out to shake his hand.
Yeah, it was a really interesting experience. You know, I had been working with him for some time before we had the first parole hearing that I represented him in. And
they were no contact visits.
all those visits at Pelican Bay while I was in the SHU were no contact. So we would, look through glass and talk to each other on the telephone, just like all the other visits up there. And those are the only visits he had had for 40 years at
I
that
visited
point.
him several times up there.
Sure. And so by the time of our parole hearing, the parole hearing is it's in a very small room, just barely enough for maybe 12 people to stand in. And so people sit all around one table. And as they brought him in, I extended my hand to shake his hand. And he paused a little bit, like it was as if it were a shock to him, or just something he was not expecting. And it wasn't until a little while later that I kind of reflected on the fact that was really the first time in decades that anyone had extended their hand in friendship and love and support towards him. And I mean, he gladly took my hand, that's for sure, and warmly shook it. But it was just something that you just don't think about. You take for granted that you have the ability to touch someone and relate to them in that way.
Mm-hmm.
But he'd been deprived of that for so long that he wasn't ready for it.
I know. I'm flashing now when they finally allowed him to a contact visit with his mother on Valentine's Day. I
Yes,
think
yeah.
it was 2014 or 15.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It was a pretty remarkable opportunity he had.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And then that's the last time she was able to have any contact.
Yeah,
with
it was a
him.
very, very limited opportunity, unfortunately. And I look at his situation and what happened to him, the things that he went through, and I also look at the experiences of so many other people who spent years or decades even in the SHU.
Right.
And over the years, I've met many of them. I actually, I think about what was it all for? Over the last couple of years, they've released most people who had been serving these indeterminate SHU terms, almost all of them. In fact, they've just converted the short corridor of Pelican Bay into level 2 housing, of all things.
What does that mean?
That means level 2 is San Quentin is level 2. Level 2 is San Quentin's main line, where people are routinely found suitable for and granted parole. It's completely the opposite of the level 4, some people call it the supermax conditions of that particular housing unit used to have. It's a dramatic turnaround. But not only that, through the efforts of those who participated in the hunger strike and other forms of protest and advocacy, a lot of people.
Excuse me, but Yogi participated in the original.
This is why I bring it up, because
Right,
I
yeah.
know that he was instrumental in supporting that effort.
Right.
But the result of that was that a lot of people who were serving indeterminate terms on these these crazy gang validation determinations, that they've been released and they've been transferred to the general population. So I had a hearing very recently with someone who had recently been released, who had been validated as a gang member, who never debriefed, but was nevertheless released from the SHU.
And excuse me, but for our listener, our viewers, debriefed means basically snitch.
Yeah, it does. The process for validating someone as a gang member involves prison officials deciding that there's enough information that implicates the person in gang-related activity, prison gang-related activity, that suggests that they present a risk to the general prison population, so they segregate them and put them in these lockup units indeterminately. So until they give up enough information about themselves and about their supposed gang and others, they're kept there. And that process for giving up that information is called debriefing. It used to be the main way that people could be released from the security housing unit, where Hugo was for so long. But because of hunger strike, because of the Ashker settlement, because of efforts by a lot of people to change those policies, people in the SHU no longer have to debrief to be released.
Oh, good.
A lot of people were released during the implementation of that settlement agreement, and they were released to general population housing units, so from the SHU to general population. Now, an important thing to keep in mind is that when people were validated as gang members and sent to the SHU, SHU being our highest security facilities, those people didn't have to have a rule violation in order to be sent to the SHU. They could be validated based on just their associations, letters they've written, signing birthday cards for other people,
reading
those
a
kind of
book
things.
by George Jackson,
possessing books of or about or by certain people. And so they could be validated, put in the SHU for decades with no rule violation. And the absence of a rule violation means that their classification points didn't shoot up, which means classification is the process for determining what security level someone can be housed at. The more points you have through disciplinary actions, the higher your security level. But if people don't get a rule violation report, their points don't go up. So when they're released from the SHU, what happened is some of them have level 2 points. So they would go directly from Pelican Bay, say, to San Quentin or Solano or somewhere like that, where there are actual programs they can participate in contrast to the SHU, which doesn't have any, really.
Right.
Now they've started to develop some, but in the past it was just correspondence, and that's about it. So the remarkable thing is that this person I was recently working with had only been released from the SHU about a year before his parole hearing, which means there's not a lot of time for him to participate in these programs that are newly available to him. Nevertheless, because he started to change himself while still in the SHU, started to distance himself from that environment and from the stupid politics that dictate so much of prison life, that he was able to demonstrate to the parole board that he was actually a changed person. And he had played along with the politics, which is very different from being a prison gang member, but prison officials really conflate those two regularly. But he was able to demonstrate he'd made those changes and was ready to be released. He was found suitable for parole, which is remarkable for someone who, they call them SHU kickouts, people who are released from the SHU without debriefing. And there's some suspicion that either they are going to try to start gang violence in the general population yards that they go to, or that they are somehow going to maintain some allegiance to those groups that they've been linked to by prison officials. But it shows that when you actually give people an opportunity to participate in programs that aren't about harming each other, that aren't about pitting us against them, and they're actually about how do I figure myself out, how do I relate to my family, how do I get ready to go home, there's an agreement on these yards that that's a recognized goal, a respected goal. And so if people are pursuing that, they don't have to be involved in politics. And that's a pretty dramatic shift from just a few years ago, and especially on some of these yards that have seen heavy-duty prison politics. So it shows that through the collective effort of so many people, including Hugo for sure, that it forced the prison officials to give people an opportunity to, notwithstanding their gang label that the prison officials place on them to program, to participate, to learn about themselves and get themselves out of prison. That's something that didn't exist just a couple years ago.
Right, right. So you think his managing to thrive almost, I wouldn't, thrive might be a bit strong, but he managed to stay unbroken and mentally stable and through all nearly 46 years of solitary confinement.
That's for sure.
Absolutely amazing.
Yeah, he was truly exceptional in that way. I've met many people who've been in lockup units, whether it's administrative segregation for a couple of days or months, or it's the security housing unit for decades. And he still stands out as one of the most resilient, strong, spirited and minded people I've ever met. That's for sure.
Yeah, I remember him saying to me, don't say free, Yogi, don't say free Hugo Pinell. I'm already free. All they can do is release me. Yeah,
that's true. And you know, that sentiment is shared by a lot of the people that I work with who have come to a point where they recognize their contribution to humanity, really, and they know that, you know, much of their lives are not about them, that they are serving some higher purpose, and that whether they're ever released from prison, they know that they are free spiritually.
He was absolutely,
no question that was him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he, one of the things that sustained him, he often wrote to me about how he talked to and communicate with his loved ones who had already joined the ancestors, and he kept that spiritual connection.
Yes.
And he was spiritual in his own way. He wasn't religious particularly, but he was very spiritual.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about some of the other work that you're doing, because you work with lifers, and you've had quite a few successes in getting lifers out, and you have a program, a benefit coming up.
Yeah, this is about, you know, first, what I do is I do work with people serving life sentences with the possibility of parole. And California has about 35,000 of them right now. And there are thousands of additional people who get a chance to go home from prison.
California alone has 35,000 doing life without parole?
Doing life with the possibility of parole.
Yeah.
So that means after they've served a certain minimum number of years, they get a chance to go to the parole board and show that they've changed their lives and they can safely be released. Many of them are housed in prisons like Pelican Bay and New Folsom and a few others that don't have a whole lot of programs that can help them get ready for release. And so we kind of fill that gap as much as we can, whether it's helping them to figure out what programs they need to participate in, or helping them, you know, a lot of what I do is more counseling than lawyering, frankly. So it's a lot of sitting across the table from someone for a few hours every few weeks or months, figuring out all the factors that contributed to them coming to prison, and how to address those factors in a way that they can, you know, rejoin their families and their communities. So that's what we do, and we've been doing it for a while. I started an organization called Uncommon Law 11 years ago. And we've helped a lot of people go home from their life sentences. I think we're up to about 170 individual lifers have gone home. And
that must be a good feeling.
Oh, it's the best feeling, especially seeing so many challenges that people have to overcome, and so many people failing because the system doesn't support them in being successful, and sometimes because they give up hope. And we've talked a little bit about the prison politics that really dictate a lot of behaviors, attitudes that are not supportive of someone coming home. One thing we have coming up next Saturday, August 26th, at the Roxy Theater, is we're screening a film called Skid Row Marathon. And it's about a client of mine whose name is Rafael Cabrera, who went to his parole hearing. He was convicted of murder and attempted murder. He was a gang member in the Los Angeles area, and he shot at what he thought were rival gang members in retaliation for one of his fellow gang members being killed. He killed one and injured the other one. He convicted of murder and attempted murder. got a life sentence. He went to his parole hearing. He had been to a couple before. But at this particular parole hearing, the prosecutor from L.A. County came to the hearing to oppose his parole, and that, which is what they typically do. But the prosecutor was so blown away by how changed Raphael was in the time he'd been in prison, how much of a contribution he was to his community already within prison, that he said, I can't oppose him. He's not who I thought he would be. He's not who he was when he was a teenager who committed this. Mm-hmm. And the parole board still denied him parole, because that was a time when they were denying everyone parole. They still deny about 80% of the people parole, so it's not as much improved as we want it to be.
Picture.
No, it's not. But in subsequent hearings, this prosecutor would write letters to the parole board actually supporting Raphael's parole. Wow. In one such letter, he said, at this point in his life and mine, I'm more of a threat to public safety than Raphael is. The prosecutor said that.
Wow.
Eventually, it took a lot.
What did he mean?
He was trying to say, this man has changed. This man really understands who he is. He's a real contribution to this community. We need him out here.
I got you.
And these are the people these are the 35,000 people we have locked up. They have the potential to make those changes, and this prosecutor is recognizing this man has made the change. So after Raphael finally gets out, we went to court. We dealt with the governor. Finally got him out. Now the prosecutor became a judge. He's a Superior Court judge now. His name is Craig Mitchell, and he and Raphael became friends. The judge, who had been seeing a lot of people come through his courtroom, and he was sentencing some to jail and prison, and he said, there has to be more that I can do with this population. So he started a running club, the Skid Row Running Club, where he would support and train people in running marathons, actually.
Wow.
And in exchange for their agreement to participate in the program, he would sponsor them, pay for them to travel all over the world running international marathons. So Skid Row Marathon is about their story, and it's about...
And how did Skid Row come into the...
Because
name?
Skid Row is the name of a community in the Los Angeles area where people, some consider them down and out, a lot of drug addiction, prostitution, a lot of,
right.
a huge homeless population. These were the people coming through the judge's court.
I see.
These are people many who were formerly incarcerated, challenged by all the barriers that there are to their reintegration. The judge said, this is a community we can work with. And Raphael got involved, and they support each other in this running club. And so this film is about their journey, but it's really about the ability for two people from seemingly very different backgrounds and experiences to connect. Brian Stevenson from the Equal Justice Initiative, he talks about proximity. How if you get close to someone, basically the stereotypes you had about them fall apart. Mm-hmm. Right? They don't fit. They don't work.
Right.
And a lot of what we do is help the parole board get close to the people that most of them spent their careers locking up, right, and keeping in prison. Now they get to see them, get to hear them, get to experience them, get to know them in a way that says, oh, that's not who you are. Their humanity and their capacity to change.
Exactly.
And so this movie really exemplifies that in a lot of ways. So at the Roxy at 4 o'clock on Saturday the 26th, Raphael's coming up, Judge Mitchell is coming up. We're going to have a discussion. The filmmakers are coming up. We're going to have a discussion after the film about this process, about who these folks are, what it took to make the film, those kind of things. And it's a benefit for our office. Our office is a nonprofit, Uncommon Law. People can learn about it at uncommonlaw.org.
Right on.
And we would love for you to come out and see it.
All right. Yeah, it sounds like a good film. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful.
So what are some of the other irons in the fire that you have?
Well, one of the other big things that we have coming up is we have an event called Uncommon Heroes. And we decided it's important to recognize those people who are not the most popular, but they're very active and very effective. And so we highlight the work and experiences and achievements of some people in the community. This year we're honoring 2 people. One is a woman named Elizabeth Calvin, who is a senior advocate at Human Rights Watch. She has authored some of the most significant legislation in recent California sentencing reform, specifically related to young people who've gotten life without parole sentences and those who've gotten life with the possibility of parole sentences. She's created a system through which they get special consideration for the fact that they were young and impressionable and impulsive, etc. when they were young,
Yeah.
and they committed crimes at those times. And the system requires the parole board to give them a different kind of consideration, account for the fact that they've grown and matured over time.
Right. Yeah.
So those laws really implement U.S. Supreme Court and California Supreme Court decisions over the last couple of years. But she's authored that legislation, at least 3 or 4 pieces of it, that have impacted about 15,000 people in California prisons. And the other person we're honoring is Nani Alejandrez, who is the executive director at Barrios Unidos in Santa Cruz. And he has, for many, many years, decades, been going inside the prisons, supporting people in developing and facilitating self-help groups, guiding them on recognizing the harms that they cause, the impact on their victims, sometimes bringing celebrities inside the institution to meet prisoners and support them. He's been doing that since before it was popular, that's for sure. And his organization is celebrating its 40-year anniversary. And I think next month, in September, they are having a 40-year anniversary. So we think it's important to recognize these folks because of the contribution that they have made. And a number of our clients have either been through their program with Nane, or they have benefited from the opportunity to go to the parole board that Elizabeth Calvin has set in place.
All right.
So that event is November 15th, and it's in Oakland at the Impact Hub.
All right.
Yeah.
And they can find it probably on your website.
On our website at uncommonlaw.org.
Well, thank you so much. If you don't mind bearing with me, I have my final report is on political prisoners, and I wanted to share. Oh boy, if I can find it. Come on. Where'd it go? Is it going to do me like that? Let me try it. Oh boy.
I think you have the same computer that I have, because it does me like that regularly.
Oh God, makes you crazy. Try this, see what happens. Nope.
You know, since we're talking about political prisoners, I have also mentioned
I got it.
John Clouchet, if you don't mind me spending just a minute.
Go ahead.
Some people know who Mr. Clouchet is.
He's one of the Soledad brothers.
Right. So he's been found suitable for parole at his last couple of parole hearings.
Oh, okay.
But the governor has reversed those. At least the last 2 the governor has reversed. And we have a habeas corpus petition pending. I've represented him in the last few years. And so we've been on this roller coaster. He's someone who is having trouble overcoming the governor's fixation on these historically interesting aspects of his case, but those that
he was exonerated.
That's the point. Those that aren't directly implicating him in any actual wrongdoing. So they talk about the Soledad brother case, the killing of an officer at Soledad prison. They talk about the Marin County Courthouse and Jonathan Jackson. They talk about George Jackson's death at San Quentin, and they try to say that Mr. Clouchet was somehow involved in those. No, he wasn't. He was acquitted in the Soledad case, never alleged to be involved in any of the either Marin County or San Quentin things. But because of the fact that he was there at the time, at the prison,
right,
because of his association being there with George Jackson, that has him stuck behind the governor's, blindfold, which seems to be anyone from that era, anyone associated with those labels shouldn't get out. And so we're fighting on his behalf.
Right. Okay, let me see. I want to get to... Okay. Among those who braved our liberation struggle and remain imprisoned after many decades are Leonard Peltier, Jan Lehman, David Gilbert, Sundiata Acoli, Romaine Chip Fitzgerald, Herman Bell, Jaleel Muntakim, Ed Poindexter, Russell Maroon Schultz, Veranza Bowers, Mutulu Shakur, Robert Seth Hayes, Kamal Siddiqui, Mumia Abu Jamal, and the Move 9, falsely imprisoned since 1978 for a murder they couldn't have committed. 2 of the Africans have died in prison, leaving 7 still incarcerated. On screen is our Move kids holding up pictures of the Move 9. 2 of the Africans have died in prison, leaving 7 still incarcerated. Janine, Janet, Charles, Debbie, Edward, Delbert, and Mike Africa, essentially for refusing to denounce Move. On Saturday, June 24th, 2017, the children of the Move family stood silently with photos of the Move members. So that's that photo. It's been established that over 15 days in solitary confinement is torture, yet most of our political prisoners have endured years, even decades, in such lockups. Oh, we're out of time. Anyway, I wanted to also talk about those who have joined the ancestors, but we'll have to save that because I might have a little bit of time. No, not really. Okay, well, I want to thank you, Keith Wattley of Uncommon Law, for joining us again on Freedom is a Constant Struggle. It's really a pleasure. Thank you for coming on short notice.
Thank you. You know, I have a couple seconds as a plug for a former client, Troy Williams, who's the new editor of the Bayview.
Yes.
There's actually an event tonight.
Right. I wish I could be there.
Yes. Congratulations to Troy.
Thank you for remembering.
Yes.
Also, March. Anyway, thank you, Jackie Perez, and thank you, viewers, for tuning in to Freedom is a Constant Struggle. I'm Keelun Yasha.